Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is 200. That is accurate. This is episode 200, season 4, episode 40. We have reached a milestone together 200 episodes of Coaching the Bible. And before we dive into anything else, our win of the week, our learning of the week, our win of the week is obviously related to that. But let's take a moment to be appreciative. Have a little moment of gratitude. That is certainly a win of the week. Getting to 200 was not a goal, for the most part. Meaning, starting out this entire process a little over 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago, was not intended to get to 200. But admittedly, over the course of time, during the course of this year, 200 was sort of a guidepost on some level, a milestone to reach, although not necessarily a goal. It helped drive in weeks and in moments when it was hard to prepare and hard to focus. That number, it's a large number, helped to move me on weeks when I simply didn't feel like I had it or didn't feel like I had anything left or anything like that. So kudos to us for getting to 200. Amazed that we had 200 subjects to talk about and that we still have what to talk about and discuss into the future. And that is the win of the week. Getting to 200, celebrating the 200, appreciating the 200. Grateful to those who have participated along the way. For all of them, for some of them, for many of them. In particular to my immediate family, to my wife and to my children who listen. At least I know my wife listens to all of them. Some of my children listen to many of them. But I appreciate all of them for pushing and participating and being part of the ideas and thinking. I don't know that they necessarily know that I'm always sort of in preparation mode, and so every conversation on some level is a seed or is a thought, is an idea, perhaps that leads into something else, that leads to another topic, subject, story, theory, what have you. So that's our win of the week. Let's see where this goes from 200 and on. I have no idea, honestly. But I'm greatly appreciative for that win. The learning of the week is related to the following. I spent 4 days overseas in the U.S. this week visiting one of our children. And one of the sort of underlying ideas in that trip, I don't have to get into the specifics, is something that my wife said to me last week that she said to that same child, which is the idea that they're never too far away for a visit, for some support, for some strengthening, for some connection. And there's nothing that's ever going to stop us from being there for them when they need us, wherever it is that they need us. No flight, no ticket, no situation is going to hold us back. And I think that's an incredibly powerful, I hope, meaningful learning that I really hope and bless you with as well, is that people in your life that are important to you are there for you, and that you're there for them when they need you, wherever they need you, however it is that they need you. And that you know that and you feel that comfort for them as well. And with that in mind, let's get to 200. Our subject of the week this week is very appropriate to what we're trying to do at Coaching the Bible. The subject of the week is learning from unconventional sources. One of the things that I am most proud of for myself, about myself, is, for the most part, the willingness to be open to learning from every source that comes my way, and to be sort of hands wide, ears open, big ears to every voice that's out there, with the idea that something can be learned from it, even if I disagree with it, even if it's not obvious, and to take to heart all those moments. Admittedly, it's part of my training. I mentioned this before, that on some level, even though I no longer practice in the rabbinate, There was something in the rabbinate that was very much about the idea of being sort of addicted to the sermon week to week and paying attention to every story, every circumstance, every conversation, with the idea that any single one of them could be next week's sermon to the congregation. And so you were sort of attuned to things that most people aren't attuned to. You're picking up on sentences, comments, lines that people share that others would sort of miss or let pass and not write down or jot down. There are friends of mine in the rabbinate who have notepads. Other people in other in industries as well, leaders who also carry on notepads, or their phone has a note app where they're writing down ideas or thoughts or quotes or stories or whatever it is, because they become seeds for something else. They are, in many cases, seeds of wisdom, or they're seeds of an idea, they're seeds of an opportunity, whatever they may be. And very often they come from quite unconventional sources. And so it is the case that as we dive into Coaching the Bible this week, that there is an obvious unconventional source of wisdom in this week's portion, and that is the donkey of Balaam. It is one of the more odd stories in all of the Bible. Admittedly, there are some that are quite out there, and there are miracles that are often quite difficult to comprehend. But the donkey of Balaam is certainly one of them. The donkey's ability to see the angel, the donkey's ability to then open its mouth and speak. Balaam having a conversation with the donkey as if it's a normal thing is a rather miraculous event. I remember years ago I was at a rabbinic conference in Los Angeles, and one of the presenters at the conference was a gentleman by the name of Saul Blinkoff. If you don't know Saul Blinkoff, he's a super interesting guy. He has a great podcast called Life of Awesome. And Saul was an animator and director for the Walt Disney Studios for a number of years. And one of the animation projects that he worked on was Winnie the Pooh. Just as a side note, he mentioned to us at the time that he had put a mezuzah in the home of Winnie the Pooh. So if you're watching those films with your children or yourself, and you look, you'll see that Winnie the Pooh has a mezuzah on his door post. Anyway, he took a moment to talk about the idea of getting creative with narrative and creative presentation, and specifically around the time that he spoke, he used a character from Winnie the Pooh, which is actually in the portion of the week. He talked about Eeyore. Eeyore is the donkey in the story Winnie the Pooh. And he talked about the idea of how would you animate, or how would you describe, and how would you depict Balaam's donkey in that story. Now, you could have it as sort of a raucous and, excited animal, at least initially. But what if it was Eeyore and it was perpetually gloomy and depressed and sarcastic and pessimistic all the time? And maybe that conversation goes quite differently. I remember it distinctly as an interesting moment, a way to think about narrative and story and how to tell a story and how to read a story and how to understand a story. It happens to be also that donkeys in the ancient Near East initially were held in quite high esteem and high standing. And as horses and more use of camels came into play, the horse replaced the donkey with respect to power and strength. That's what it's part of the idea of horsepower. You don't have donkey power. You have horsepower, and you have camels, which is a sense of wealth and high standing and being regal. And the donkey became the beast of burden, similar to the ox. You can always see images, you can always, you can in your head, the image of a person riding a donkey that is piled high with all kinds of belongings and packages and suitcases and what have you throughout the Middle East and other parts of the world even today. And so it's an interesting choice that Balaam is riding a donkey as opposed to a horse or as opposed to a camel, and it probably makes the story even more profound. So as the story opens, we know the story. Balaam has been given the space to go with the servants, the servants of Balak, the king of Moab, to go and curse the people of Israel. Along the way, as he's going, he's riding his donkey. It's been his donkey for years, and suddenly the donkey sees the angel, so on and so forth. The donkey sort of bucks. Balaam hits the donkey speaks after being hit 3 times. It's like an amazing sort of moment. What do we take away from a story like that? What are we trying to glean and learn from a story like that, from a situation like that? So there are a lot. One of the things that I thought about that story in particular that was unique as a leadership point and a coaching point for us here is the idea of learning great wisdom from unconventional sources. Now, Balaam doesn't seem to take any sort of lessons from his donkey, but we can. And if nothing else, just a simple step of appreciating it. That is an oddity, that is a rarity, and that is not something to sort of fluff off as nothing, but to take very seriously and to ponder the unconventional sources when they come and to be prepared for them. Talmudic literature, Midrashic literature, homiletical literature, meaning speeches and sermons, all point out this idea of paying attention to all the voices, no matter how unlikely the source may be. To be humble enough to appreciate wherever the wisdom comes and to take it as it is. The Mishnah in the Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 5, paragraph 6, highlights the miraculous nature of the donkey speaking. And it's clearly extraordinary. It's one of those things that's created, at the last moments of creation in the first 6 days, along with, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, the ability of the ground to open up and swallow the family of Korach. It is a miraculous event. You should not expect to go outside, and although people talk to their pets and they talk to their plants, the idea that those plants or pets are actually going to talk back. In this case, it actually did. So it's important for us to appreciate the value of unconventional wisdom, the value of unconventional sources of wisdom, and the unconventional teacher as it comes. There's a great quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, which is this: every person I meet is in some way my superior, and I can learn from them. That is that sense that I have something to gain from this, that this conversation, this interaction, this moment is not a coincidence, and it's not something to sort of dismiss, but something rather to take the moment of, to pay attention to be mindful of as it's happening. This is happening for a reason. If you buy the notion, minimally at least, in the people of Israel, the Jewish people of today, that we are the most intentional of people in terms of the way we practice and the way we act, and that we don't believe in the sense that anything is a coincidence, then we should take these interactions in these moments more seriously. The random person sitting next to us on a plane, the flight attendant, the cab driver, what have you, wherever it may be. And so I think it's something to think about. If you think about it even further, King David is quoted or is learned from in also Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 6, paragraph 3, the idea that we have to learn from everyone and that we have to therefore view everyone who has taught us something as our great teacher. It says there that one who learns from his fellow one chapter or one law or one verse or one word or even one letter is obligated to treat that person with honor. For so we find with King David, the king of Israel, who learned from Achitophel, one of his great advisors, no more than 2 things. Yet he called him his master, his guide, and his beloved friend. We call them our teachers. They become important. And so it's important for us to appreciate and value the insights that come from the most unexpected of places. And so let's, for a minute here, talk about the value of the unconventional wisdom, the missed opportunity in not paying attention to the unconventional wisdom, and then how to prepare or to implement some sort of a framework or a structure wherever you may be as a leader to be able to be that sort of magnet for all these kinds of ideas. First and foremost, appreciate the following thing. Unconventional wisdom can, in fact, drive new innovation by virtue of the fact that you're getting new perspectives. By getting diverse inputs, by getting people from a variety of backgrounds and sources, you get to new creative solutions. Secondly, I think it very much builds a greater sense of resilience around your team because you're sort of not one level deep. Your fabric is more enmeshed and tied together. When we're better prepared for unforeseen challenges, it is when we are more open to unexpected insights. And so, if we want to accomplish more things in the world and new things in the world, then we can't simply rely on the same old education and the sources of that education. We have to be willing to accept that those are coming also from new possible places. Also, obviously, you're going to be more dynamic. When every voice is heard, is valued, then everyone's more engaged and more motivated, and so you're going to be more creative. Going back to the Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 4, paragraph 1, Ben Zoma said, "Who is wise? He who learns from every man." The idea being that a person, and this comes from the commentary known as the Bartanura, that a person who is learning not just from people who are bigger than him. So forget about Emerson, who may be superior, talking about superiors, but even when you're learning from people who are smaller than you, quote unquote, since the person in that space is not concerned for his ego, it's clear that his learning and his wisdom is really in the interest of the sake, what we'll call, quote unquote, the sake of heaven, and not for his own publicity, his own social media, his own influence. It's simply for the ability to acquire greater knowledge and to be better ultimately. So think about that quote for a second. Who is considered wise, or who's called a wise person? Right? Attaining that title of wise, typically speaking, one might think, and I think we talked about this at some point in Coaching the Bible, is typically associated with someone who has the most knowledge. But that's not the truth about wisdom. Wisdom is more than just knowledge. It's wider, it's deeper, it has greater breadth, greater depth, greater width, greater size. And that doesn't just come from books. That comes from people, that comes from interaction, that comes from conversation, it comes from experiences, it comes from events, it comes from winning, it comes from losing, it comes from succeeding, it comes from failing. There's a whole lot that comes in. This is why it's very much apropos for us in Coaching the Bible this week as we celebrate 200, is appreciating the unconventional wisdom, the unconventional sources. There, of course, on the flip side, to the benefits, there are the pitfalls, the dangers of unconventional wisdom as well, which is that not every unconventional idea, even if feasible, is worth pursuing. It may not even be critical, it may not be valuable. That's certainly true. Additionally, there's a massive amount of resistance to change, which we've talked about a lot. And so when it's coming from someplace unconventional, you can imagine that people would be resistant and challenge the source of it, understandably, but challenge it simply because it's coming from someplace unconventional. People will cling to that which is familiar to them and definitely immediately view something as some sort of radical, crazy idea. It can lead to conflict. It can lead to all kinds of difficulty. And additionally, when you have to balance novelty with practicality and novelty with regularity and novelty with what's conventional wisdom, even though conventional wisdom is usually wrong, you bump up against this friction. And so we have to be mindful of this, and we have to be attuned to it, even as we have to be open to the reality of the unconventional source for wisdom. Again, it could be a conversation with a young child. It could be a conversation with a random person on a street. As a leader, first and foremost, we have to be humble around everything, and we have to be curious around everything. The humility appreciates the sense that I don't know everything. I have not experienced everything. As we joked about once, I have not had enough days to have made all the mistakes that have existed in the world. So we learn from other people. We don't have all the answers. We can't come up with all the ideas. And that our ability to synthesize from other resources, to be that magnet for ideas, for opening up our ears and listening, that call comes from that sense of humility. It also comes from this massive sense of curiosity, which I think is super important as well here. I'm going to go a little long this week. give me a few minutes to breathe here because it is episode 200. That curiosity is super important. Last week I gave a course, I mentioned it, on AI for nonprofits, and in the course of that conversation, somebody asked me about just sort of learning about this stuff. And I said, besides having an interest in tech and the idea that perhaps getting ahead on AI is good for my business, and it probably is, I have this curiosity about knowledge. I just like to learn things. I just like to know new things. Not because I share any or all of it. Sometimes I do, and sometimes maybe I'm accused of being a know-it-all. But it is really in the interest of simply knowing more about God's great earth and all the knowledge and intellectual wisdom that may exist in the world. Being part of that environment of continuous learning is great for leaders, and imparting that and cultivating that around the team that you have, whether that's the team in your house, i.e. your family, the team in your community, i.e. your neighbors and friends, or the team that you have at work, literally your team, then I think you're creating an incredible environment for innovation and greater success, perhaps far greater success than you could ever have imagined. And ignoring it, as mentioned before, can lead to stagnation, a lack of innovation, and a lack of interest in participating. Ignoring the diverse voices that exist around you can hinder your progress, and for sure will hinder your success. So putting together a room of people who look the same, who breathe the same, who act the same, who come from the same background, isn't actually to your benefit. It might be comfortable, but as we said all the way back in maybe episode 2 of Coaching the Bible, the comfort zone might be beautiful, but nothing grows there. And so getting into the space of discomfort, getting into the space of the diversity of voices can actually help you succeed. Famously, an example of that from history is President Abraham Lincoln. So as you see many politicians today and many political parties today sort of hunkering down around one set of ideas and dismissing everybody else as a radical, as a crazy, as an outsider, as whatever you want to pick, President Lincoln actually established his cabinet of leaders from among his greatest rivals. In 1860, when he won the nomination, he beat out William Seward, Salmon Chase, and Edward Bates. Those three ended up in his cabinet, even though he disagreed vehemently with them, because the diversity of opinions made him greater. By having not just people around who were yes men, who placated his every whim, his every thought, he was able to harness the power of great ideas. This comes from the book Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. And when you look at the deep level of sort of what you might call an inclusive leadership style, admittedly with these diverse and raucous and divergent opinions, you appreciate the sense of that unconventional structure, which perhaps led to some of the great ideas and some of the great power that helped Lincoln end the Civil War and put the United States of America back on a different footing. So it's really important to appreciate this. And undergirding this, the underlying theory and philosophy simply revolves around sort of three basic ideas. One, there's something powerful in cognitive diversity. That's one, we mentioned it a couple of times. Diverse groups outperform homogeneous ones in problem solving. Super important. Number two, psychological safety, which we mentioned also way back, I think in episode 1 of Coaching the Bible from Amy Edmondson. The idea that teams perform better when members feel safe to speak up. So by creating an environment where the unconventional is expected and accepted and welcomed is really crucial. People will be willing to say things that might be outlandish, might be crazy, might be dismissed, but it'll also allow for new ideas to percolate and to come to the top. And then, of course, inclusive leadership. By encouraging inclusivity among the team, getting people to participate, leads to greater and better decision-making overall. And so that leads us to sort of two frameworks. These are made-up frameworks. I worked on these, admittedly, with my quote-unquote assistant. We call them ChatGPT, which is based in the idea that there are a lot of ideas floating around, but when you sort of pull them together into frameworks, you potentially have a great opportunity for great success. And framework number 1 is what we'll call the DII framework, diverse input integration, which is basically this idea. Number one, creating diverse input integration, DII framework, create a culture of inclusivity, establish formal channels for input, implement cross-functional teams, getting people from different parts of the team, different parts of the company working together, which might seem unconventional, might seem unnecessary, but you never know the success of it. I'll give you a great example. When I was last working at a company, the last company I worked at, a company called Cosmatch, and when we did annual or quarterly planning, we would work part of the time in pairs to flesh out ideas, to work through concepts, questions, and things like that. And often the pairs were people from quite different departments in the company on purpose. You'd have a finance person working with the coaching person. You'd have the marketing person working with a product person. The idea being that seeing things from different perspectives in the company allowed for a new lens on what was going on, and perhaps a new perspective, and perhaps some new ideas. So this diversity to get greater input leads to greater success. Number two, as a framework, was what we would call an innovation ecosystem. So you want to appreciate the organizational ecosystem. You might do this for anything that goes on in an organization. But you might also want to do this from an intellectual standpoint to appreciate, where do all the ideas come from in our company? How do we learn? How do we synthesize new ideas? Where does that come into the way we think? Where are we sharing that? And then appreciate where these sort of networks might exist or opportunities might exist for growth, for expansion in that, for inclusion in that from outside the typical or the obvious. And so if you start to leverage external networks and partnerships in this, then your innovation ecosystem grows. So once you map the system and then you appreciate who are these sort of the concentric circles around your center, you can appreciate what they're bringing in, what they're not bringing in. You might be able to then get further data from them in asking them the right questions and bringing them into the conversation for overall success. And so you get here from Unconventional Wisdom incredible opportunity. It's a great example from the real world would be Google. Google has a 20% policy, or at least it used to, I'm not sure it still does, which allows employees to spend a portion of the time, up to 20% of the time, on projects of their own choosing. You might ask yourself, well, that's great. What came of it? Something called Gmail came from that. Google News, which is less popular than Gmail, also came from that. But by allowing people to think about other things, to work on other things, they also benefited from it because it began to plant seeds from that learning, from that cultivating, from that collating of knowledge and wisdom from other places and that other work. Allowed them to bring in seeds from the work that they were doing into the space that they existed. I'm going to share with you one other concept. It's called Kaizen. Kaizen was Toyota's philosophy when it started as a company, which is Kaizen is translated as continuous improvement. The idea being that we're always looking to get our people to continuously to get better, to become either more efficient, to improve quality, to improve the systems, efficiencies, whatever it may be. And that will ultimately lead to greater innovation and to greater success. So what you end up having as a company is ultimately this incredible resource. If you view the world as your classroom, to expand on the idea that Kobe Bryant once said about basketball, that the entire world was his basketball court, because every place he went to, he learned from and brought that into his basketball. If you view the world as your classroom, every environment is a room to learn in and learn from, then there's an infinite amount of material to learn. There's an unfathomable amount of wisdom that's out there, and most of it, and the best of it, is unconventional. And to end it off, I'll end with a quote this week from Confucius as we head into the next, who knows how many episodes of Coaching the Bible. Here's that quote. If I am walking with two other men, each of them will serve as my teacher. I will pick out the good points of the one and imitate them, and the bad points of the other and correct them in myself. That is a bit elongated, Coaching the Bible for this week, episode 200. To each of you, I wish an incredible and wonderful weekend ahead.